Here's a photo of Daniel Pearl during his captivity in 2002, after the Wall Street Journal reporter was kidnapped in Pakistan while investigating extremist networks. Pearl was held by militants linked to Al-Qaeda, and investigators later concluded he was murdered by Khalil Sheikh Mohammed, the architect of the 9/11 attacks. After weeks in captivity, a video surfaced showing Pearl forced to read statements on camera before he was beheaded, with the footage circulating online as extremist propaganda. The killing drew worldwide outrage, not only for its brutality, but because Pearl had been abducted while simply pursuing a journalism assignment. Here's a body cam still of Tiffany Taylor speaking with police after she escaped an encounter with New Jersey serial killer Khalil Wheeler Weaver in 2016. Taylor told officers that he targeted black sex workers because he believed their disappearances would draw less attention, but her report was not fully acted on at the time. Prosecutors later said Wheeler Weaver continued killing, targeting vulnerable women he met online. Frustrated by the lack of progress, friends of one victim carried out their own social media investigation, eventually helping link him to multiple cases. The information ultimately contributed to his arrest, and he was later convicted of several murders and sentenced to life in prison. Jordan James Park, the British influencer known as the Lip King, has died at age 34 after a suspected complication linked to a cosmetic procedure. Park gained notoriety for spending more than $150,000 on surgeries and even appeared on the reality show Botched, where doctors warned him about the risks tied to extreme fillers and repeated operations. Police are currently treating his death as unexplained, while a man and woman were arrested on suspicion of manslaughter as the investigation continues. The case has quickly sparked renewed discussion about the dangers of unregulated cosmetic work and the overwhelming pressure created by online beauty trends. In October of 2011, 2-year-old Wang Yu wandered into a market street in Foshan, China, where she was struck by a van and left critically injured in the road. Surveillance footage later showed dozens of pedestrians and drivers passing by without intervening before a second truck ran her over. After several minutes, a female waste collector finally moved her to safety, but the child tragically died a few hours later from her injuries. The case sparked worldwide debate about bystander behavior, public responsibility, and the social pressures that may discourage people from intervening in emergencies. Takeru Kobayashi, the competitive eater who helped popularize modern eating contests, said he stepped away from competition after years of extreme training left him disconnected from normal hunger. In recent interviews, he's explained that he rarely feels hunger and sometimes even forgets to eat, saying he envies people whose bodies still send basic appetite signals. Kobayashi suggested that constantly forcing himself beyond fullness may have dulled the body's natural warning system, with doctors noting that long-term competitive eating can distort hunger cues and place lasting stress on the body's digestive system. In December of 1984, 12-year-old Janelle Matthews disappeared from her home in Greeley, Colorado, after returning from a school concert, leaving behind signs that she'd been taken from the house. For decades, the case went unsolved until construction workers discovered her remains in 2019, 15 miles away from where she disappeared. Investigators soon focused on former neighbor Stephen Pankey, who'd repeatedly inserted himself into public discussions about the case and referenced it several times while running for governor of Idaho. Prosecutors said his own statements and changing stories helped tie him to the crime. In 2022, Pankey was convicted of kidnapping and murder and later sentenced to life in prison. This was the moment a South Carolina teen heard the sentence that would change his life forever. The case stemmed from a 2015 trailer fire that killed his 14-month-old stepbrother Joshua Hill, after prosecutors said 17-year-old Jacob Matthew Morgan set multiple fires inside the home, including in the room where the toddler was sleeping, before stepping outside as the flames spread. Matthew, who's autistic, became the center of debate during the investigation, with supporters arguing his confession and behavior may have been misunderstood, while critics also questioned why he'd been left alone with the child despite earlier concerns about his behavior. The fire moved quickly through the trailer, leaving little time for rescue, and the child later died from injuries caused by the blaze. Matthew ultimately accepted a plea deal in 2016, pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter, arson, and unlawful conduct toward a child, receiving a 15-year prison sentence. But because the crimes were classified as non-violent under South Carolina law, he was projected for early release and was released in December of 2022, followed by several years of probation. In December of 1988, Hollywood cameraman Bob Samuels, whose credits included Short Circuit, The Color Purple, and Beverly Hills Cop 2, was found shot to death in his Northridge home, killed through a pillow used as a crude silencer. Investigators later accused his estranged wife, Mary Ellen Samuels, of arranging the murder to collect a $500,000 life insurance payout. Afterwards, she was said to have spent lavishly, including a Cancun trip where photos surfaced of her posing nude with large amounts of cash. Prosecutors also alleged that when the hired gunman began cooperating cooperating with authorities, she arranged for him to be strangled before he could testify. She was ultimately convicted for her role in the conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison. In August of 1993, 6 Kazakhstani hikers died during a trek through Siberia's Kamar-Daban mountain range. The only survivor later told investigators that members of the group suddenly began screaming, bleeding from their eyes and ears, foaming at the mouth, and clawing at their throats before collapsing one by one on the mountainside. Official reports ultimately ruled most of the deaths as hypothermia, with the group leader reportedly dying from a heart attack. But the survivor's description of the final moments has kept the incident controversial, with theories ranging from altitude sickness and poisoning to extreme weather exposure. Here's some insane footage of a domestic cat that's reached an astounding age of 29 years, the rough human equivalent of someone in their late 130s. Most house cats live 12 to 15 years, and even reaching 20 is rare. Cats that make it this far are often born with unusually resistant genetics that slow age-related organ failure, especially in the kidneys and heart, and that advantage is typically reinforced by consistent care in a low-stress environment. A doorbell cam caught this bird appearing to float in midair because the camera's frame rate synced perfectly with its wings. Each time the camera captured a frame, the bird's wings were in the exact same position, creating the illusion that it was suspended motionless above the driveway. In January of 2020, Storm Gloria completely battered the coast of Spain, whipping seawater rich in organic material into massive clouds of sea foam. Powerful winds blew the foam inland, piling it waist-high through the streets and swallowing storefronts, cars, and people. The surreal scenes were a side effect of a storm that also caused deadly flooding, widespread destruction, and multiple fatalities across the country. Before fame, Shania Twain was already carrying adult burdens as a child, singing in bars until 1 a.m. at the age of 8 just to help keep her family afloat. But in 1987, that fragile stability was suddenly destroyed when her mother and stepfather were killed in a violent car accident after their vehicle was struck head-on by a truck driven by a drunk driver. Shania was only 22 when she became the legal guardian of her 4 younger siblings, putting her music career on hold to raise them and keep the family together, stepping into survival mode years before the world ever knew her name. Christopher Tapp spent more than 20 years in prison for the 1996 murder of 18-year-old Angie Dodge, a crime he didn't commit. Police had coerced a false confession out of him, even though none of the DNA at the scene matched. In 2019, genetic genealogy finally identified the real killer, leading to Tapp's full exoneration and a record-breaking $11.7 million settlement he received in 2022. But less than a year after finally reclaiming his life, Tapp was found beaten and unresponsive in a Las Vegas hotel room after an altercation. The coroner ruled his death a homicide, and a former pro wrestler was later charged. This woman's life has been changed forever by a random horrific attack that lasted only a few seconds. 46-year-old Ashley Wazalewski was suddenly attacked without warning while walking near Forsyth Park in Savannah, Georgia, after attending a Christmas program at a nearby church on December 10, 2025. A stranger had approached her from behind and poured a corrosive chemical directly over her head, causing immediate catastrophic burns. The liquid ate through her clothing, burned deep into her skin, and was so caustic it melted a key fob in her pocket as it spread across her body. She suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns over more than half her body, including her face and scalp, and began screaming as her clothes started burning off her skin. The attacker didn't take anything from her and simply fled the scene within seconds. A good Samaritan rushed in to help as she wailed in agony and called her family. Wazalewski was quickly transferred to the Augusta Burn Center, where doctors say recovery will involve prolonged hospitalization, multiple surgeries, and permanent scarring. As of the latest updates, the attacker has not yet been identified or arrested. Mary Kay Letourneau became one of the most notorious teachers in American history after authorities discovered she'd formed an illegal relationship with a 12-year-old student in her class, a crime that shocked the country and completely destroyed her family. She was arrested in 1997 and sent to prison, where she gave birth to his child while still serving time. When she got out on parole, a judge ordered her to stay away from the boy entirely, but she was caught violating that order and was sent back to prison to finish a full 7-year sentence, a move prosecutors said showed how disturbingly deep her attraction to him ran. When she was finally released, the story took an even darker turn. The former student, now an adult, chose to reunite with her, and the pair eventually married in 2005 despite their relationship beginning as a felony case, described by experts as a profound abuse of power. They stayed together for over a decade before finally separating, leaving behind one of the most unsettling and controversial teacher-student scandals in recorded history. On July 5, 2011, 37-year-old Kelly Thomas, a homeless man with schizophrenia, was beaten, pinned down, and repeatedly tased by Fullerton police during a violent encounter captured on audio and surveillance footage. Officers had responded to a call about someone allegedly breaking into cars, and when they found Thomas rummaging through trash near a bus depot, they claimed he became uncooperative during questioning, a claim later disputed by witnesses and contradicted by portions of the footage. As officers piled on top of him, Thomas screamed for his father, begged them to stop, and cried out that he was being killed. Prosecutors later noted he said, "Dad, help me," 31 times, "Help me, God," 26 times, and "Okay" or "I'm sorry" over and over as he slipped into unconsciousness. He arrived at the hospital in a coma with severe head trauma, multiple broken bones in his face, irreversible brain swelling, and died 5 days later. 2 officers were charged, including one for second-degree murder, but both of them walked free after the case collapsed in court. During World War II, Nazi SS units carried out one of the regime's most disturbing programs, the mass kidnapping of up to 200,000 Polish children for forced Germanization. After being taken from their families, the children were sent to SS-run children's education camps, where they were subjected to horrific racial selection exams. SS doctors measured their skulls, noses, eye colors, and body proportions, trying to determine whether each child looked Aryan enough to be turned into a German. If a child passed the test, they were renamed, stripped of their identity, and adopted into German families as if they'd never been Polish at all. But if they failed, their fate was much darker. Many were transported to concentration camps, where countless children died from starvation, disease, abuse, or execution. Only an estimated 10 to 15% of the kidnapped children were ever found and returned to Poland after the war. At the Nuremberg trials, the Allies confirmed the program a form of genocide, the deliberate attempt to erase an entire population by stealing and remaking their children. In 2020, Megan Thee Stallion survived an attack that left her bleeding in the street, shot in both of her feet as she tried to walk away from a late-night argument. Bullet fragments tore into the back of her left heel and scattered through the soles of both feet. Injuries so deep that surgeons couldn't remove all the shrapnel, and pieces are still lodged inside her body. The man she identified as the shooter was later convicted and sentenced, but Megan has said the worst part wasn't the pain. It was being viciously mocked online by people who insisted she was lying, exaggerating, or milking the incident while she was recovering from gunshot wounds. In 1910 Los Angeles, a woman named Miss Bell had been searching for her missing Scotch Terrier for weeks when her friend G.E. Seawright stumbled upon the answer by pure nightmare coincidence. The man was having a hot dog for lunch when he suddenly bit down on something hard, a small metal object hidden deep inside his meal. When he fished it out and wiped it clean, he immediately froze. Stamped on the metal was the identification number of Miss Bell's missing dog. Only then did he realize the horrific truth. The dog had somehow been cooked into the meat of a local hot dog stand. Misty Lohman's viral mugshots came in the midst of years of personal and medical collapse. Before these images were taken, she had endured the losses of 3 infants in a short span, 1 miscarriage, 1 stillborn, and 1 that died shortly after birth, and she soon turned to drugs to cope with the unimaginable grief. At the same time, her health was unraveling from lupus, bone cancer, and scleroderma, a disease that thins and tightens the skin and can drastically change a person's appearance. As her condition worsened, she was arrested repeatedly for low-level drug charges, including possession, paraphernalia, and failure to appear in court, producing the series of shocking mugshots that later spread online without context. In the years since, Misty has entered long-term treatment, has been sober for 5 years, and now speaks openly about her medical conditions and the losses that shaped her life, pushing back against the misinformation and cruel insults that followed those photos. A little after 1 a.m. inside their Texas City home, 15-year-old Jaden Gonzalez was handling a pistol when it suddenly went off, the bullet hitting his 17-year-old brother Joshua in the chest. Their father, 41-year-old Jay Gonzalez, was right there when the shot rang out and immediately dropped to the floor to help, desperately trying to stop the bleeding and keep Joshua conscious. But in the middle of the chaos, with his son dying right in front of him, Jay's body gave out. He collapsed from a medical emergency believed to be a heart attack. By the time paramedics arrived, Joshua was already gone and Jay couldn't be revived. Police confirmed the shooting was accidental, leaving the family with 2 tragic deaths within the span of minutes. He convinced her he was a 300-year-old werewolf, and it led to one of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian history. In 2006, 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson fell into a secret relationship with 23-year-old Jeremy Steinke, a self-proclaimed 300-year-old werewolf with a history of abuse, drugs, and violent fantasies. The pair openly talked about murdering people, even modeling themselves after natural-born killers. On the night of April 23rd, Steinke slipped into the Richardson home while high and drunk and stabbed Jasmine's mother 24 times, then brutally killed her father after telling him it's what your daughter wanted. Upstairs, Jasmine murdered her 8-year-old brother as he tried to defend himself with a toy lightsaber. Hours later, instead of hiding, the couple went to a party laughing, making out, and laughing about how her little brother gargled as he died. Arrested the next morning, Jasmine became Canada's youngest person ever convicted of multiple murders. She served the maximum youth sentence, had her record completely wiped in 2020, changed her name, and now lives in the community, while Steinke, now calling himself Jackson May, serves life with parole eligible in 2032. In March of 2019, rising Liverpool indie duo Hers were in the middle of their first US tour when tragedy struck. After performing a packed show in Phoenix, 24-year-old Stephen Fitzpatrick and 25-year-old Alden Lauding began their overnight drive to California with their tour manager. Just before 1 a.m., their van was hit head-on by a pickup truck driving the wrong way on Interstate 10. The collision erupted into flames, killing all 4 men instantly. Investigators reported no signs of braking and found an open container in the wrong-way driver's wreckage, suggesting alcohol may have been involved. Just hours earlier, the band had posted that their US tour was going swimmingly and that they were almost home. Their debut album, Invitation to Hers, would become their final record. In 2012, a Pennsylvania tree worker named James Valentine was trimming branches high off the ground when his chainsaw suddenly kicked back. In an instant, the blade plunged deep into his neck and shoulder, stopping just millimeters short of severing vital arteries. Miraculously, the chain jammed before it could spin further, but the saw itself remained embedded in his flesh. First responders found him conscious, with the chainsaw still lodged in place, and carefully stabilized it as he was airlifted to a trauma center. After hours of delicate surgery, doctors successfully removed the saw and repaired the massive tissue damage. Against all odds, Valentine made a full recovery. In 2001, U.S. border agents at the Mexican border discovered 42-year-old Enrique Aguilar Canchola sitting inside a hollowed-out passenger seat that had been modified to look completely normal. He'd been sewn into the seat to sneak into the U.S. undetected, but agents noticed the seat looked unusually bulky and pulled the car aside. Canchola was immediately arrested along with the driver. In 1980, the FBI set up a fake company to expose corrupt politicians, and 25% of the congressmen who were offered bribes accepted them, leading to multiple convictions in one of the largest stings in U.S. history. In 2025, South Carolina teaching assistant Alexander Lewis was arrested after repeatedly spraying a powerful fart spray inside of West Florence High School, triggering nausea, headaches, and respiratory issues among students and staff. The odor contaminated parts of the building's ventilation system, forcing inspections and cleanup that totaled more than $55,000 in damage. Lewis was charged with disturbing schools and malicious injury to property, turning what he thought was a harmless prank into one of the most expensive school incidents of the year. In 1998, 21-year-old Matthew Shepard was lured from a Wyoming bar by 2 men who pretended to be his friends. They drove him to the edge of town, robbed him, and savagely beat him before tying him to a wooden fence and leaving him to die in the freezing wind. 18 hours later, a passing cyclist found him comatose and barely alive, his face so bloody that he was first mistaken for a scarecrow. Matthew had been pistol whipped and was beaten so brutally that his face was completely covered in blood, except for where it had been partially cleansed by his tears. The injuries were deemed too severe for doctors to operate, as Matthew died 5 days later from massive head trauma. Prosecutors argued the attack was fueled by robbery and deep-seated homophobia, something one of the killers later admitted to. Both men, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson, were convicted of felony murder and sentenced to life in prison while narrowly avoiding the death penalty.